I am so glad that you are all here this morning. We are in our Lenten series about the cross. Today we are on the cross part 4. What we have been doing over the past couple of weeks is looking at some different facets, some different angles of the cross. What happened on the cross? What happened when Jesus was on the cross? And then what does it mean for us in our lives today? One of the driving quotes for me that began this whole series was, if the cross doesn't change our lives, then what's the point of the cross? And that's our belief. That's what we believe here at Awaken. It's what I believe, is that the cross transforms us. It changes us. And the question that I've been asking over these 4 weeks through Lent is, what is that change? How are we transformed? And then how do we live in response to what Jesus did on the cross? Now, this morning, this book, Unclean, I have right here, and this is my source material, I guess you could say, for today's sermon. Read this book a little while ago, absolutely blew my mind, and I needed to share with you some of what this author, Richard Beck, had to say. And obviously, my own little flavor is mixed into it as well. So recommended reading, my source material, the book Unclean will have a few quotes from it, and then you'll find my take on it kind of blended all throughout. And before we get there, if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Philippians chapter 2, and let me introduce you to Richard Beck. I've read a few books by him. Every single book that he writes, there is quite a bit of wisdom in there. There's always something that strikes me quite profound, and it always makes me think. He's a very critical thinker. I absolutely love anything that Richard Beck writes. Today, obviously, we're looking at his book, Unclean. Now, Richard Beck is a clinical psychologist, and he is a theologian. All of that is mixed in together with his writings, which makes for a quite interesting read. And in the book Unclean, what he talks about, in order to talk about what happened on the cross for our conversation here this morning, it's termed the psychology of disgust. If anyone asks, what did you talk about in church this week? You can just answer the psychology of disgust, or we could call it the psychology of contamination. Anyone familiar with this clinical term? All right, well, you are in for a treat this morning. Essentially, what the psychology of disgust is about is how life exists as boundaries. There are particular boundaries in life. We are comfortable within our own little circle, and then once you step outside of that circle, you cross a boundary into unknown, the unfamiliar, something that doesn't quite feel right. We all have our circle of comfort. We all know how that feels. Everything is easy, and then all of a sudden something happens, you come across someone, you come across another idea, and it's outside of that circle, and it crosses a boundary. The whole idea that we'll be looking at this morning is how life exists as boundaries, and in order to talk about this and the psychology of disgust, which is the phrase of the morning, we're going to look at Paul Risen's work. He is another psychologist, and this is what Beck gets into in order to frame his discussion. Let's start with this experiment. Who knows what this is? I see some of you begin to squirm a little bit. What is this? Yes, you might be disgusted here this morning. I guess I don't quite apologize, since that's the topic that we're going to be looking at here this morning. This is a cockroach. Now, one of Risen's experiments was he gathered a group of people, and there was a cup of apple juice. Then there was a sterilized cockroach. I don't know how you sterilize a cockroach, but apparently this cockroach was boiled, was sterilized, and was placed into the apple juice. And then everyone who was told, hey, like, perfectly safe, this is better probably than the drinking water that comes out of your tap, unless that's been purified and sterilized. How many people do you think drank the apple juice? Absolutely none. 0. Then, from my understanding, the cockroach was removed from the apple juice. The juice was boiled. It was treated. It was sterilized again. The cup was sterilized. The cup was cleaned. then given to that group without the cockroach present, but they already knew that the sterilized cockroach had been placed into the apple juice prior. How many people do you think then drank the apple juice? None. None. How many of you would eat these? These are brownies. These are brownies. Some of the participants in the study were handed these brownies shaped like dog turds. How many people, knowing that they were brownies, do you think ate these brownies? 0. Okay, John Shue would have eaten them. 0. How about this one? This is someone spitting. Now, once you spit, saliva that was in your mouth, it was a part of you. But then once you spit it out, how many of you, let's just say you spit into a cup, you're going to drink that saliva that you've spit out. How we doing this morning? Don't worry, we're going somewhere, I promise. This is the best opener ever. Psychology of disgust. Yeah, because something that was a part of you, but then once you have expelled it, well, that crosses the boundary. You're not going to ingest it back in again. Here's how Beck sums up these experiments. The point to take away from Rosen's research is this. Once something is appraised as contaminated or polluted, emotions take over. Reasons go out the window. The brownies are just brownies. They're just shaped in a way that makes you disgusted, making you think that there's something wrong with them because your mind is telling you, whoa, 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 no. You know what this is. There's no way that this could be brownies, even though rationally and logically, you know that it's just whatever is normally within a brownie. Why is this important? Because people are often appraised as disgusting or as a source of contamination. That's a problem, and that conversations about these persons or contact with them generate strong and irrational emotions. Think about the Nazi reactions toward the Jew. Most of these reactions were or are intensely emotional and irrational. How can you discuss issues rationally when people are being motivated by disgust psychology? How can these people ever hope to love or serve the people they viscerally loathe? I hope it's now obvious that Christians are going to need to monitor and manage their disgust appraisals if they are going to claim to be ministers of love and reconciliation in this world. Let's start with the incarnation. I found this picture. I love the image of this. You have Jesus, God, being born in this world in the flesh. Philippians says it this way, talking about Jesus, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. If we look at the beginning of the life of Jesus with the incarnation, what we find is the crossing of a boundary. We have the divine becoming human. You might say that which is completely pure, 100% clean, now becoming possibly contaminated, not as clean, as pure as a divine being. Because in the ancient world, there was this belief, and we still have this belief, I think, in our world today. The gods, or God, depending on your view of religion, is somewhere up there in heaven, removed from here, this place. Heaven is the domain of the divine, and that's where the gods resided. In the ancient world, sometimes the gods came down here, they had some fun, they did some things, they messed with humans, but essentially they would go back to their home because that's where the gods lived. Earth was the domain of humans. When God puts on flesh through the incarnation, when Jesus is born, we have the crossing of a boundary. We have that which is supposed to be up in heaven, the divine, now making its home here with humans on earth. In the ancient world, and this is the thing about the cross. I mean, the cross turns religion completely upside down. All the old ideas about religion and how religion worked and how you interacted with the gods, all that was flipped upside down because what happened on the cross, what happened in Jesus, completely revolutionary. Obviously, it never happened before, but it changed how we, or at least it should change how we as humans think about who God is and how God desires to interact with us. Before the cross, ancient world, there was this separation. I would argue this idea still exists in our world today. We've just put more modern forms on it. Here's how you would summon the gods in the ancient world. You would offer a sacrifice. You would have an altar. You'd burn some incense. And essentially what you're doing, if you see the aroma is wafting up to the heavens because your hope is that you burn something that is pleasing. That's why in the Old Testament, there's all these psalms, these worship words where they're saying, may this be a fragrant offering. It's like someone's cooking in the kitchen and you smell it and it makes you go explore to see, well, what are they cooking? This smells great. I can't wait to actually eat the thing that they're cooking. And so through a sacrifice, you're hoping to get the gods' attention. You're hoping that there is going to be this pleasing aroma that the gods up in heaven out there will notice and then pay attention to you. You are trying to do your best essentially to summon the gods through your performance, through your sacrifice. But in the incarnation, the birthing of Jesus into our world, we have God coming down to the earth not because of a sacrifice on the part of humans, not because humans are offering the right thing, they're performing the right way, they're doing the right thing, but rather we have this movement, heaven to earth, strictly because of love. Nothing that humans have done in order to earn this God's favor, approval, or attention. God is coming down in the person of Jesus because of great love for humanity. This has never happened in the world before this moment. It was always about how do you get the gods here? And now we have God is here with us because you are deeply loved. This wasn't in response, again, to a certain performance or to a gift that was given to the gods. Also, you'll find this word all throughout the Old Testament, this word holiness. There was this belief that God is separate. Holy means to be separate. There was this belief that God was separate from humanity. And now you're finding that boundary in Jesus, that separateness is being crossed. God is moving into our domain, that gap that humans have experienced, that they felt, that they would vocalize. That gap, in a sense, it's being closed. And actually what you find all throughout the Bible, even before the coming of Jesus, here's Leviticus. It's this command for the people of God to be holy like God, to be set apart, to be separate. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus chapter 11, consecrate yourselves and be holy. I mean, how could humans ever be holy? If someone were to say to you, like if I were to leave this sermon and be like, all right, the takeaway for today is go and be holy, you'd be like, whoa, I don't know if I can do that. That's a daunting task, is it not? We're like, hey, here is your invitation, here's your charge, leave here and now be holy this week. And don't mess this one up. And yet this is the invitation that God has been offering his people from very early on in the story. And here it continues, 1 Peter after Jesus, just as he who called you is holy, be holy in all you do. What we find here in this invitation to holiness is it's an invitation to be part of the life of God. I mean, this is mind-blowing. This is revolutionary. Gods were separate. They were out there, up there, and every now and again they would come and they'd mingle with us, and maybe we could get their attention. But now what we find in Jesus is the true God has always been paying attention to humanity, and the true God desires out of love to dwell with us, to be with us, and to invite us into, we can call it the Trinitarian life of God. We're now invited to participate with God in how we live our lives. This is the crossing of a huge boundary. If you were alive in the world 2,000 years ago, this would have been a major crossing of a boundary. And for us today, it still is a major crossing of a boundary because it's hard to wrap our minds around this idea. And then as we follow the life of Jesus, we find that his life was simply one boundary violation after the next. Jesus was always getting in trouble. If Jesus was sitting here and I was his pastor, I probably would be calling him into my office. Hey, Jesus, we got to talk again. Here's the deal. I know you're trying to do good things, but Jesus, you just can't go hanging out with those people. Jesus, the Sabbath, here's a couple examples here. Matthew 12, the same time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples, they were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. The Pharisees, religious leaders, when they saw this, they said, hey, your disciples are doing what's unlawful. You're breaking a boundary. You're not supposed to pick the grain and eat it on the Sabbath. On a Monday, that's fine. But not today. You cannot. We are good religious people, Jesus. We're trying to teach you how to earn the favor and approval of God. Can you please listen to us? Stop picking grain on the Sabbath, and then God will be happy with you. Here we go, Matthew 12, going on from that place. Jesus went to their synagogue. There was a man with a shriveled hand was there, looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus. They asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus obviously did heal him a little bit later. You know what happened when Jesus healed on the Sabbath, when he broke this boundary? The Pharisees went out. They plotted how they might kill Jesus. A boundary violation, breaking a purity code, a purity law. It was so sacrilegious that the religious leaders said, we have to get rid of this man because if others follow his example, they're going to lead all of us to hell. That's essentially what they're saying. If other people follow this man who is breaking all of our purity laws, well, then others are going to begin to follow him, and God will no longer be happy with us as a people, and God will now turn his back on us. Because for the religious leaders, how did you earn God's approval, God's favor? By keeping the law, by remaining pure, by making sure that you yourself were not being contaminated and that you stayed away from others who were, quote unquote, contaminated. Matthew 9, Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. There were many tax collectors and sinners there at dinner. Sounds like a great party. They ate with him. They ate with his disciples. Now, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? What are the religious leaders afraid of? That Jesus is going to be polluted. That Jesus is going to be contaminated. You can't keep breaking these purity laws. There's boundaries we have in place so that God will stay on our side. We have these rules, we have these boundaries that show us how we love God, and you're doing everything possible to break all of them, and we have to stop you no matter what it costs. It's the breaking of these purity laws, one of the reasons that Jesus went to the cross. Because the religious leaders said, we can't have this, we must kill him so that we can maintain a right and proper relationship with God. Now, these law keepers, I said it before, the religious leaders, Pharisees, they're well-intentioned people. They really are. They want to honor God with their lives. They're like many of us. They're trying to do the right thing. They just have their eyes a bit closed. They're a bit blind. They're stuck in their ways. They're not open to the Spirit that is trying to expand their view of God and show a bigger, more beautiful, more loving, more grace-filled way to understand God. But their heart is essentially in the right place because they do want to honor God, and they want to do everything that they possibly can to maintain their purity. You're probably like this as well. You're here this morning. You come out to church week after week because you want to follow God with your life. You want to live a life that's pleasing to God. That invitation, be holy, you're doing your best to follow that invitation. And the Pharisees, they felt like they had a responsibility, these religious teachers. Their example would lead others. And so they wanted to live a particular way because they realized that as they lived, well, others were looking to them for leadership. They were looking to them for an example in how to live. And so they were doing their best to lead the people in a way that was honoring to God. Their rationale is something that Beck calls negativity dominance. And here's what negativity dominance is. When the pure and the polluted come into contact with the pollutant, the pollutant, I have glasses and I still have trouble reading that small print. I think that means I'm old. Oh man, I guess it happens to everyone. When the pure and the polluted come into contact, the pollutant is the more powerful force. The negative dominates over the positive. Let's think back to our cockroach example. What was it that was more powerful than the sterilized apple juice? The cockroach. Rationally, we might know, all right, it's been sterilized. People in different cultures, they eat cockroaches. The apple juice, it's probably fine, but in our rational thinking minds, the cockroach outweighs all of it because our emotions take over. So for the religious leaders, even if they were to sit at a table with someone that they thought was impure, they would fear that they would then become impure because of the negativity dominance, which is that the impurity of these other people would, in a sense, take over, would trample their purity. If they were in a wrestling ring, they would lose. They'd be pinned to the mat by the other person's impurity. And so that's what's going through their minds. They were living in constant fear. Their religion was rooted in fear of God instead of grace and love. They were afraid of becoming unclean. You're breaking that law. You're breaking that law. And instead of just living a life of love and following the Spirit and living in response to how the Spirit was leading them, they were constantly looking around, afraid that if they stepped over a shadow, if they stepped in this area, if they sat with this person, if they did this on the Sabbath, they would lose God's love. You ever been there before? You ever go through life living with some of that anxiety, that fear? You want to honor God. You want to live a life that's pleasing to God, but you're looking around all over thinking, I blew it here. I messed up there. And then you think back to 6 years ago and there's the weight of that just overpowers you, and you're just living in this constant state of fear and anxiety that if you step out of line, the love of God that you so desperately desire and long for will no longer be yours. I mean, so you can understand the Pharisees, right? It makes them a bit human when you realize that they're just like we are. They're just like us. And sometimes we go in waves. Sometimes we live in grace and we live in love. And then there's other moments when it feels as if we've fallen out of that grace and we revert to performance and earning and doing in order to earn God's favor. We go back to this ancient way of understanding the gods, and we think if I just do all these right things, if I perform this way, if I say this prayer, well, then I'll somehow summon God here to my side. But what the incarnation, the coming of Jesus into the world shows us is that love is always by your side. God is always with you, even in the moments when you find yourself in the gutter. There's nothing that you can do. There's nowhere you can go where God's love and grace isn't right there with you. I think the only thing that changes is our feeling of that grace, our experience of that grace, because emotion takes over. So the Pharisees were doing all of this so that God would accept them. And we ourselves are hardwired to perform instead of receive. I want to read you another quote here from Unclean. The Pharisees never once considered the fact that the contact between Jesus and the sinners might have a purifying, redemptive effect upon the sinners. Why not? The logic of contamination has the power of the negative dominating over the positive. Jesus doesn't purify the sinners make Jesus unclean. They can't wrap their heads around Jesus purifying, God making humanity clean and pure. Because for them, it was all about themselves making them pure and clean. It was all about what they could do to maintain their purity, to earn their purity, rather than allowing Jesus to do that for them. I have one more quote that I need to read, but it was too long, so I'm going to just read it from the book because I didn't want to write it all out. My hand was starting to hurt. But I feel like I have to read this because when I read this, I had to go back and read it a couple times. This, for me, amazing. Negativity dominance is problematic in the life of the church because in the missional moment, when the church makes contact with the world, the power sits firmly with the world as the location of impurity. According to the logic of negativity dominance, contact with the world defiles the church. You ever find anyone who likes to hang out in the church? And they go to this study, and then this study, and then this group, and then this group. And those are all really good things, but sometimes it can be motivated out of fear. I'm going to stay here in my little huddle with others who believe just like me instead of going out into the world and sharing the love of God, the love of Christ with others. Given this logic, the only move open to the church is withdrawal and quarantine, separation from the world. In short, many missional failures are simply the product of the church following the intuitive logic of disgust psychology. The world is contaminated. That group, those people, that person is contaminated. So I'm going to stay here within my little circle and everything will be okay. At least I'll be able to maintain my purity. And I get it. Boundaries are important. We're not talking about just forgetting boundaries altogether. Of course, we need boundaries. We need to utilize wisdom in how we live our lives. So I'm not advocating for living life with no boundaries. Please do not hear that this morning. That's another conversation. That's an important conversation as well. What is striking about the gospel accounts is how Jesus reverses negativity dominance. Jesus is, to coin a term, positivity dominant. Contact with Jesus purifies. A missional church embraces this reversal, following Jesus into the world without fears of contamination. It's important to note this is a deeply counterintuitive position to take. Nothing in our experience suggests that this should be the case. The missional church will always be swimming against the tide of disgust psychology, always tempted to separate, withdraw, and quarantine. Now, two implications for us today. Here's the first. The pursuit of purity over loving others can lead to the fear of the other. One more quote from Beck here. All right? I told you I was going to use a lot of his material. As seen in Matthew 9, the pursuit is very often understood to be a way of loving or pleasing God. As a consequence, my pursuit of holiness, loving God, comes to compromise my ability to love my neighbor. Sometimes we withhold love because of fear. I can't talk with that person. I can't spend time with them. I can't go to this place because if I were to spend time here, then I will become contaminated. And churches have those discuss groups. Groups of people who are outside of the boundaries. All churches have them. And what the example of Jesus is one of loving all people. And not being afraid that we as followers of Jesus might become polluted or contaminated by spending time with other people, but rather we are to go into the world and through how we live our lives be an example of grace and love for others. Sometimes in our pursuit of holiness, we separate ourselves and we see others as unworthy of love. But the example of Jesus is one of love for every single person. The religious leaders were unable to love because there were groups and individuals who they were afraid of, and as a result of their fear, they were not able to offer love to all people. So for us this morning, with the example of Jesus, we are to live beyond fear and to trust that the greatest invitation that Christ offers us is to go into the world, to not just huddle together with other Christians, other followers of Jesus, other people that look, think, and believe the same as you, but to go into the world, and that whoever you happen to interact with, that is a person worthy of love, and that is a person that you are to love like Jesus loved every single person Jesus came in contact with. That is that not the greatest command? You love your neighbor. And oftentimes our pursuit of holiness gets in the way of the ability to fully love our neighbors. And every single person is your neighbor. Second implication, a focus on creating our own purity makes us unable to see our own need for grace, because then it's all about us and what we can do, how we can perform, what we can earn. On the cross, Jesus broke a whole host of purity laws. Obviously, he broke them leading up to the cross, but then on the cross, things got even worse. It was considered impure to shed blood. Public nakedness made you unclean. Broken bones made you impure. Hanging on a tree was one of the greatest curses. You can read about that in the Old Testament. If you were hanging on a tree, that was a curse. The person on there was cursed. And then also Jesus was violating the Sabbath by being out there. Jesus broke even more purity laws on the cross. You know what that tells me about what happened on the cross? Is that on the cross, Jesus carried the weight of all of it. All your sin. All your impurities. All the uncleanliness that you might be carrying around, that might be haunting you. On the cross, Jesus took all of it. One of my favorite authors, he says, we sinned our sins into Jesus on the cross. So on the cross, Jesus carried the weight of all of it. All the times when you missed the mark. The times when you've blown it. When you didn't offer love. All the sins, the impurities, the uncleanliness of the world, Jesus took the weight of all of it and buried it in the ground and took it to the grave so that you don't have to carry the weight of making yourself appear pure before God. Purity, cleanliness, new life, God's unconditional grace, love, favor, merit is a gift. You can't earn it. It's already been offered to you. The only thing we can do is to open our hands and receive. To trust that on the cross, Jesus took all of it and buried it. And it's gone. And we can now live in freedom. We can now live beyond fear. We don't have to approach our relationship with God as if we're on a tightrope, afraid that any misstep we're going to fall off and that we're going to lose God's love. But rather, we can live in confidence that we're loved and we're accepted and we are made pure because of Jesus, because of the cross. That's the invitation of the cross this morning, to trust that Jesus buried all of it and proclaimed you pure. So may you trust, and may you walk forward with this confidence that through Jesus, you are being made brand new, and that you can appear as righteous, holy before God. So may you trust that invitation this morning, and may you place all the shame, the sin, any of the uncleanliness that you feel, may you place it on the cross with Jesus and trust that it's buried and gone and that you can live free.